So energy markets have been really volatile. What's been going on? How does the Iran conflict compare to what we saw with the Russia and Ukraine crisis? So how does market liquidity impact the price that businesses pay? So how do renewables fit into that picture? So are there any risks to the way that businesses have traditionally gone about their energy purchasing? Should businesses be changing the way that they're purchasing energy? What would be your one key takeaway for UK businesses?
My key takeaway would be...
So Andrew, thank you for joining me today to talk about energy markets and what's been going on recently. So we know that energy markets have been really volatile over the last few months. What has been going on?
Yeah, there's been significant risk around getting energy out of the Middle East with the Straits of Hormuz closed and then the back and forth on whether that's going to reopen again. So that's not been a straight line at all. And we've seen a lot of changing sentiment around positivity on whether energy supplies are going to be resumed. We're seeing some positivity around that, but it really can change from day to day. And that's why we've seen significant moves in prices just in the space of 24 hours.
So it's been very kind of headline driven recently.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the crisis that we're seeing around Middle East energy this year, I think really highlights the fact that the fundamentals which drive the market are sometimes not the most significant driver, and it is a lot around sentiment due to geopolitical changes. Yeah.
And is that why the market reaction that we've seen in the most recent kind of crisis has felt quite different to what we saw in the 2022 Ukraine-Russia energy crisis?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a very different market this year because we're in a very different market. When we saw the advent of the Ukraine war, Russia-Ukraine war, it led to the ending, essentially, of a significant volume of energy that was coming directly into Europe with pipeline gas. We were already seeing the advent of LNG becoming far more of a fuel for Europe and specifically for mainland Europe. And since the Russia-Ukraine crisis, we've seen the infrastructure around that change, and the amount of energy coming in from the global market has significantly increased. So we're far more exposed to the global market than we were in 2021, for example. There's also the fact that we haven't got a significant compounding factor which helped drive prices up to the levels that we'd never seen before in 2022, in that there was a real lack of confidence in electricity supply going into winter, which is why we saw winter baseload prices get up to nearly £1,000 a megawatt hour, because there was real concern around supply security. A compounding factor that we have seen this year, and I think everyone will be experiencing this, like personally, is the persistent heat waves and just generally elevated temperatures that we've seen this year. So we've had limited or more limited than ideal amounts of gas coming into Europe, and we were expecting a lot more supply this year with new infrastructure coming online. But heatwave conditions mean that there's extra pressure on the generation and distribution systems. There's French nuclear issues, which we see pretty much every summer, but increased temperatures mean that they've been more pronounced this year. There's lower hydro levels and just generally increased demand from increased air conditioning consumption because it's been hot. So there has been pressure. What that's led to is, and this is a story that we see every year, especially now we're a bit more exposed to the global market and our supply sources have changed, but storage in Europe. So current gas storage levels are lower than they were at the same point as we are now in 2022. And refilling that storage ahead of winter delivery is quite a big target. And it's raised some quite significant questions on supply security going into this winter and what that looks like if we have a cold winter.
So all of this volatility and increased prices that we're seeing in the energy market is absolutely going to be impacting customers. And something that we also hear a lot about is how that's affecting market liquidity. But what does that actually mean and how does that impact an energy customer?
Liquidity is essentially a measure of how well a market is working. In a liquid and efficient market, there'll be plenty of buyers and sellers, and the spread between prices of which people are willing to buy and sell should be quite narrow, and therefore the market functions. We don't generally see a very liquid market, specifically in UK electricity, but it varies across European markets. That impacts the customer because as a supplier or the customer themselves, depending on their contract arrangement, want to go in and transact energy and hedge their exposure to energy markets, the ability to do that, especially at scale, can be quite limited. And it also magnifies the moves in prices that we see. So if a seller is willing to sell a small volume at a price, and there's not many other sellers at that point, it will mean that the price moves up, and it becomes a seller's market, essentially. And we see the inverse of that as well, and it moves quite significantly from day to day.
So if I'm a customer who is used to agreeing a fixed price for my energy on a unit rate basis, what does all of this market change mean for me?
So I think the combination of increased volatility, and that goes across the board. We see real extreme volatility in short-term prices, but also larger volatility than we were typically used to in years gone by in longer dated contracts. That attracts a premium, and a customer looking to buy a fixed price contract is essentially paying a premium for certainty. And as volatility increases and liquidity decreases, the premium that certainty requires is going to increase, because you've got to capture all of that risk.
So we've seen a lot of change, and if we take a step back and look at what the UK generation mix looks like now, how has that changed over time as well, and what impact is that having?
I think you can sum it up in one word: renewables. Renewables plays a larger and larger proportion of the generation activity in the UK, and that has some great benefits on days where there is plenty of sun, plenty of wind available, and actually it can become a little bit too much at times. But also when there is a lack of that generation hitting the grid, it means that more marginal and more expensive generation needs to be brought online in order to meet the country's needs. Now that feeds into some of the elevated volatility that we're seeing in prices, specifically in short term. And like just an example, we saw day ahead prices, so like the benchmark for short-term electricity, move from £20 a megawatt hour to £160 a megawatt hour in the space of a few days this year. That kind of volatility is quite hard to capture when you are valuing a longer dated price. So that's where it feeds into the increased certainty premium that customers are likely need to pay in their fixed price contract.
So if we're in a world where ultimately it sounds like the price that we're paying for our energy is quite significantly impacted by things like the weather, what can I as a customer do to try and manage the impact that has on me?
The best way to tackle this is to be engaged in your energy spend. What used to be a maybe 2-year fixed price contract that you would sign off every 2 years, that might not be the best way to approach your energy expenditure moving forward. Having an element of flexibility in your approach to how you secure your energy, but also how you consume it, where and when you consume that energy, is going to become increasingly important. Taking a flexible approach in both procurement and consumption is the ever more important way of managing your energy spend. But also I think that the first and most important step in that is engaging with it and being up to speed and informed on current developments and what the market looks like over the next couple of years as it significantly changes.
So we know there's been some really big changes. We know there's been significant volatility in the market, and there's an awful lot that could change in the near future as well. So what are the key things that you would suggest customers should be keeping an eye on or looking out for to try and help them plan?
Well, I focus on the commodity portion of the bill, so keeping up to date with what is going on in wholesale commodity markets is really important, and being aware of the changes that we're seeing both in immediate drivers and also the trends longer term. There's also a significant amount of change that we're expecting in both the commodity portion and the other half of the bill over the next couple of years, be that Clean Power 2030 and all of the policy changes that come with that, the change to the generation mix that is being encouraged through those policies, and what that means for day-to-day power dynamics and then the impact on price as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Those big changes that we've talked about in the market in terms of the growth of renewables, those are being driven by big policy changes, and absolutely those impact not just the commodity side, but they have a huge impact on the non-energy costs that our customers are exposed to as well. So it's really important that they get themselves informed on both parts of that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've covered quite a lot of ground here, but for business energy customers, what's the one thing you'd really want them to take away from this?
I think the key word is flexibility. That's flexibility in the way you consume your energy, flexibility in the way that you procure your energy, and flexibility in your expectations around that as well. Having that 2-year contract that I referenced earlier and signing that and not thinking about it for 2 years may not be the most appropriate way for customers to manage their exposure to energy any longer. So approaching that with a level of flexibility and updating your viewpoint around that would be my key takeaway or key message.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really, really useful.
You're welcome, thank you.